I didn't cry when I read my brother's text. I didn't throw my phone across the room. I just sat there on my couch in my apartment in Austin, rereading the same 43 words over and over until they stopped feeling like words and started feeling like a door closing. Hey, just wanted to give you a heads up before the family group chat goes crazy. Mom and Dad decided to keep the rehearsal dinner small, like immediate family only. You know how it is. We'll catch up after the wedding weekend, okay? Love you. Immediate family only. I am immediate family only. I am immediate family. I've been immediate family for 28 years. I set my phone face down on the coffee table, walked to my kitchen, poured myself a glass of water I didn't drink, and stood at the window looking out at the street below. It was a Tuesday evening in October. The leaves on the oak tree across from my building had gone rust and gold. A neighbor's dog was being walked in small, impatient circles. Everything outside looked completely normal, and I stood there thinking, so this is what it feels like to be edited out. My brother's name is Nathan. He was getting married in 6 weeks to a woman named Brooke, and they were having the rehearsal dinner at my parents' country club in Scottsdale, Arizona. The one my father had been a member of since before I was born. The one where every significant family event of my childhood had happened. The one where my parents had hosted Nathan's high school graduation party, my cousin's baby shower, my aunt's retirement dinner. I had been to that club probably 200 times in my life, and I wasn't being invited to my brother's rehearsal dinner. The reason, delivered no text by Nathan like it was a scheduling inconvenience, was that my parents wanted to keep it intimate. Just the two families. The Kellermans and Brooks family. The Hargroves. Close family only. I am their daughter. But I understand now that those two things had stopped being the same thing a long time ago and I just hadn't been paying attention. Let me back up because this doesn't make sense without the last 4 years. When I was 24, I left a stable marketing job at a mid-sized company in Phoenix, a job my father had helped me get through a colleague of his, a fact he mentioned at least once every family dinner, and moved to Austin to work at a startup. The startup was building a data infrastructure tool for small healthcare providers. I believed in it. I had spent 6 months talking to the founders before I made the move. I had done the math. My father sat me down the week before I left and told me I was making an emotional decision. He used the phrase chasing a fantasy twice. He said I had a good thing and I was throwing it away because I was young and restless and thought I knew better. He was not cruel about it. He was calm, measured, disappointed. The way he always was when he'd already decided you were wrong and just needed you to admit it. My mother cried. Not because she was sad, because she was worried what people would think. I left anyway. The startup failed after 14 months. I won't sugarcoat that. It was a hard year. I spent 3 months freelancing, scraping together contract work, eating a lot of rice and not saying a word about it to my family because I could not give my father that satisfaction. Then I found another opportunity. A tiny company, 8 people, building a compliance automation platform for the same healthcare space I'd spent the last year learning inside out. This time, I wasn't just an employee. They offered me equity, a real piece. I said yes. That was 2.5 years ago, 6 weeks before my brother's rehearsal dinner. That company was acquired by a larger healthcare technology firm based in Nashville. My equity stake, which I had never mentioned to anyone in my family, not even to Nathan, was worth just under $4 million after taxes. The deal closed on a Wednesday. I drove to a park near my apartment and sat in my car for an hour because I didn't know what else to do with my body. I hadn't told my parents because I had learned, slowly and then all at once, that information was currency in my family, and my father controlled the exchange rate. Every piece of good news I'd ever shared with him had been weighed against some standard I never got to see, found wanting in some specific way, and returned to me with a small puncture in it. If I told him about the acquisition, it would become his story. He would tell people at the club. He would add his own commentary. He would find the angle that made it about his patience, his wisdom, his willingness to wait it out. So I hadn't said anything. I was still sitting on that information when Nathan's text arrived. I read it again. Immediate family only. I thought about calling Nathan and asking him directly whether this decision came from him or from our parents. I thought about it for about 30 seconds before I realized it didn't matter. The outcome was the same either way. I wasn't being included, and no one had thought enough of me to tell me to my face. I put the glass of water down. I picked up my phone. I didn't call Nathan. I called my travel agent instead. Her name is Denise, and she has been booking travel for me since I moved to Austin and started being able to afford real trips for the first time. I told her what I needed: a house, not a hotel room, not a vacation rental, a house in Sedona, Arizona, available the weekend of my brother's wedding. Big enough for 12 to 14 people, with a pool, outdoor space, the kind of kitchen where you could actually cook, a place that would look stunning in photographs. Denise was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "What's the occasion?" I said, "A wedding." She found me a property within 2 days. A 6-bedroom estate in the hills above Sedona, red rock views from every window, a heated infinity pool that disappeared into the canyon line, a professional kitchen with a 12-burner range, 2 outdoor fire pits, and a great room with floor-to-ceiling glass that faced west so that every evening the whole room turned amber and gold. The rental was $8,000 for the weekend. I booked it without hesitating. Then I made a list. The list had 14 names on it. My college roommate Jade and her husband, who had been trying to plan a trip to Arizona for years. My childhood best friend Simone, who had driven down from Denver when the startup failed without me even asking, who had sat on my floor eating takeout while I ugly cried about my career and had never once made me feel small for it. My cousin Patrice, who had been quietly edged out of family events for years, ever since she'd had the audacity to move across the country and build a life that didn't orbit my parents' expectations. My dad's older sister, Aunt Carol, who had told me privately at a family Christmas 4 years ago that she thought what my father said to me before I left for Austin was unkind, and who had never really been welcomed into the inner circle after she said so. A handful of other people I had collected over the years, people who showed up, people who called back, people who laughed without needing to be the funniest person in the room, people who had chosen me when choosing me wasn't the convenient option. I called each of them personally. I didn't text. I told them I was going through a big life change. I wanted to celebrate it quietly with the people who mattered to me, and I was hosting a weekend in Sedona the same weekend as my brother's wedding. I covered every flight. I covered the house. I told them to bring nothing but themselves. A few of them asked if I was okay. I told them I was better than I'd been in years, and I meant it. I did not post anything. I did not tell Nathan I had plans. When my mother called me the week before the wedding to check in, a 4-minute conversation during which she mentioned the seating chart, Brooke's dress alterations, and the weather forecast, but did not mention the rehearsal dinner. I said I hoped everything went smoothly and I would send a gift. She said, "You're not coming to the wedding?" I said I didn't get the impression my attendance was a priority. There was a silence that lasted about 5 seconds. Then she said, "Your father and I just thought it would be less complicated to keep things small this time." Less complicated. I had been making things complicated, apparently, by existing. I said, "I understand. I hope it's a beautiful day." She said, "Don't be dramatic, honey." I said goodbye and hung up. The weekend arrived. Jane and her husband flew in from Portland. Simone drove down from Denver and arrived at the estate 2 hours early, immediately put on a swimsuit and was already in the infinity pool when everyone else started pulling into the driveway. Aunt Carol flew in from Charlotte. Patrice came from New York. The rest trickled in across the afternoon. Old friends, good people, everyone in good humor, everyone curious and warm and ready for a weekend that didn't require them to perform anything. I had hired a private chef through a hospitality service in Scottsdale. His name was Marco, and he had worked in restaurant kitchens in Chicago and New Orleans before moving to Arizona to freelance. He arrived Saturday afternoon and spent 3 hours in the kitchen preparing a dinner that made 3 separate people say it was the best meal they'd ever eaten. We had dry-aged ribeyes with chimichurri, a roasted beet and burrata salad, grilled corn with cotija and lime, and a chocolate lava cake situation that Jade's husband was still talking about the next morning. We sat outside under string lights. The temperature at sunset was 68 degrees. The red rocks to the west had gone deep violet in the fading light. Someone poured a second round of wine. Simone told a story about a road trip disaster from 2010 that had everyone laughing so hard Aunt Carol had to set down her glass. Patrice gave a toast. She hadn't planned it. She just stood up at some point with her glass raised and said something about how the people who find their own table are always the ones worth knowing. I took a picture of the table, 14 people, good food, string lights, rock formations in the background, dissolving into the evening sky. I posted it to my Instagram, no caption, just the image and a location tag, Sedona, Arizona. I did not tag any family members. I did not have to. The call started at 9:47 the next morning. The first was from Nathan. I let it go to voicemail. The message was confused rather than angry. He'd seen the post, wanted to know if I was actually in Sedona, wanted to know who all those people were, seemed to be processing the information in real time. My mother called at 9:52, then 9:54, then 10:01. My father called at 10:99. He did not leave a voicemail. He called again at 10:11, and 10:19, and 10:19, and 10:19:5. Brooke's mother, who followed me on Instagram from when Nathan and I had been closer and had never thought to unfollow, apparently saw the post and sent it to my mother with a message asking if everything was okay with the family. This I would learn later. At the time, I was eating breakfast on the back terrace with Jade and Simone, watching a hawk circle in thermal loops above the canyon, my phone face up on the table, vibrating so persistently that Jade finally said, "Are you going to get any of those?" I said, "Eventually." She looked at the screen. She looked at me. She handed me the mimosa she'd just poured for herself. My father called a total of 19 times before noon. My mother, 11. Nathan, 7. There were a handful from numbers I didn't immediately recognize. Cousins, I suspected, who had seen the post and been sent to check in. 51 missed calls by the time I turned my phone over at 2 o'clock and went for a swim. I did not call any of them back that day. On Sunday evening, after Marco had made a final round of breakfast for dinner omelets, thick cut bacon, Dutch baby pancakes with fresh berries, and after Aunt Carol had cried a little saying goodbye because she said she'd forgotten what it felt like to just be around people without any agenda, I sat on the back terrace alone for a while after everyone had gone inside to pack. The sky was clear. The rocks had gone black against a deep blue hour that hadn't quite tipped into night. I could hear the fire pit crackling behind me and voices drifting out from the great room. Someone laughing, someone asking where they left their charger. The particular low, comfortable sound of people who feel at home somewhere they've just arrived. I thought about the first time my father called me a burden without using that word. I was 17. I had just gotten into a summer design program at a university in Boston. The kind of program I'd applied for on my own. Paid the application fee with my own babysitting money. Told no one about because I was already learning that wanting things my father didn't approve of was easier to do quietly. When I told him I got in, he said, "That's a long way to go for something that's not going to help you in any practical sense." When I said I wanted to go, he said, "It's not really in the budget right now, Noelle." My name is Noelle. My family calls me Noelle, like they couldn't be bothered with the extra syllable. I didn't go to the program. I stayed home that summer and worked at the country club, the same one Nathan had his rehearsal dinner at, as a hostess. I used the money I made to pay for my first semester of the online business courses I started taking at night, teaching myself things I would use later, in a startup I believed in a city I moved to alone, with no safety net in a suitcase and a father's voice in my head telling me I was making an emotional decision. The acquisition check cleared 11 days ago. The first thing I did after sitting in my car at the park and processing the number was call a financial advisor I'd been working with for 2 years. The second thing I did was call a real estate attorney, not because I was buying property, not yet, but because I had some research to do. When I was 19, there was a period when my father's landscaping business was having a serious cash flow problem. I only knew about it because I'd overheard a conversation between my parents that I wasn't supposed to hear. My father had come to me quietly, not in front of Nathan, not at the dinner table, quietly, in the way he did things when he didn't want them to be talked about, and told me he needed me to co-sign a line of credit with him. He said it was temporary. He said he would handle all the payments. He said I would never need to worry about it. I was 19 and I wanted my father to look at me the way he looked at Nathan, and I signed. He did handle the payments, technically. But when I checked the credit record later, years later, when I was applying for my first apartment in Austin and had to pull my full report for the first time, I discovered that the line of credit had been renewed twice, that my name was still on it, and that there was a period of 4 months in 2019 when payments had been late. Those 4 months had dented my credit score. Not destroyed it, but dented it, enough that my first apartment application in Austin was approved on a higher deposit than normal. Enough that when I needed a small bridge loan during the hard months after the startup failed, the interest rate was higher than it should have been. When I'd asked my father about it, carefully, not accusatorially, just asking, he had said, "I don't remember it being that serious. Your mother and I got you through school, Noelle. We gave you a foundation. You can't reduce everything to a transaction." I was 25 and I didn't know how to answer that, so I didn't. I was 25 and I had to answer that, so I didn't. I was 28 now, and I had a different kind of vocabulary. The attorney I called helped me understand my options. I was still technically a co-signer on a line of credit that had been renewed without my explicit reauthorization, which, depending on interpretation, raised some questions. I could file a dispute. I could demand a formal accounting. I could make things very inconvenient for my father in a way that was entirely legal, entirely documented, and would require him to explain some choices he had made over the course of a decade. I did not do any of that. What I did do was quieter and, I think, more final. I had my attorney send a formal letter to my father, certified mail, return receipt requested, notifying him that I was formally requesting to be removed from all joint financial instruments bearing my name, including the line of credit, and that if he did not initiate the removal process within 30 days, I would be taking further steps to protect my credit standing. The letter arrived on a Thursday. My father called me the following Monday. It was the first call I'd answered since the weekend in Sedona. I let him go through the opening, the slight confusion, the attempt at casual, the gradual shift into something cooler and harder. Then he said, "What is this letter, Noelle?" Not a question, a statement with my full name on it. I said, "It's a formal request. My name is on your line of credit. I need it removed." He said, "I have always taken care of that." I said, "Mostly." Silence. He said, "Your mother and I built everything we have for this family. The country club, the house, everything Nathan and I." I said, "I didn't ask for any of that. I asked to be removed from a financial instrument I co-signed at 19 under circumstances that, looking back, I should have questioned more carefully." He said, "This is about the rehearsal dinner." I said, "This is about a line of credit." He said, "You are being," I said, 30 days, Dad, and I hung up. My mother called 4 times over the next week. I let them all go to voicemail. She didn't mention the letter in any of them. She talked about Nathan and Brooke's honeymoon plans, about a problem with the gutters on the house, about a charity luncheon she was helping organize in November. Normal things. The kind of things you talk about when you want to pretend a larger conversation isn't waiting in the next room. Nathan texted once. He said, "Hey, I don't really know what's going on, but I hope you're okay. I'm sorry about the rehearsal dinner. It was Mom and Dad's call, and I should have pushed back harder. I didn't." I sat with that text for 3 days before I answered. I said, "Thank you for saying that. I'm okay. Genuinely. Take care of yourself." I meant all 3 sentences. I still do. Patrice sent me a voice memo a week after the Sedona weekend. She was driving somewhere. I could hear wind through a half-open window, the occasional sound of her turn signal. And she talked for almost 8 minutes about the weekend, about how strange and good it had felt to just be in a place where no one needed anything from her. How she'd watched me all weekend and noticed I was the most relaxed she'd ever seen me. How she thought I had done something that most people don't have the nerve to do, which was decide that the people who keep score are allowed to keep score without you. I listened to that memo probably 4 times, and Carol sent a handwritten note that arrived in a small envelope with a cardinal postage stamp on it. It said, "I always knew you were going to be fine. I just didn't know how fine. The red rocks were the most beautiful thing I've seen since your grandmother's rose garden. Come visit me in Charlotte sometime. I mean it." I put the note on my refrigerator. The line of credit issue resolved itself before the 30-day deadline. My father initiated the removal paperwork. He did not call me while it was processing. He did not explain anything or apologize for anything. He handled it administratively, the way he handled things he didn't want to discuss. And when the confirmation arrived from the bank, I filed it in a folder and made myself a cup of coffee and stood at my kitchen window again. The same window where I'd stood reading Nathan's text 6 weeks earlier. The oak tree outside had lost most of its leaves by then. The neighbor's dog was out again, less impatient this time, sniffing something at the base of the tree with total absorption. The street was quiet. I thought about the summer I was 17, the design program in Boston, the babysitting money I'd spent on an application fee, the way I'd taught myself to want things quietly so there was less distance to fall when they got taken away. I had lived a long time in a version of myself that was sized to fit around other people's comfort. Smaller in ambition so my father wouldn't feel challenged, more agreeable in conflict so my mother wouldn't cry, more patient about being edited out of things so I wouldn't seem dramatic. Immediate family only. I have a different family now. It's not a different blood family. I'm not naive enough to think that story's over, or that Nathan and I won't find our way back to something, or that my parents won't age and the dynamics won't shift in ways I can't predict. Life is not an Instagram post with a clean resolution. But I have Simone who drove to Denver and sat on my floor. I have Patrice who toasts without warning. I have Aunt Carol and her handwritten notes and her cardinal stamps. I have Jade and her husband and the breakfast table on a Sunday morning in Sedona, when everything was amber and no one needed me to be smaller. I deleted the family group chat on my way back to the car after checking out of the estate, not dramatically, not with any announcement. I just opened it, read the last message, something from my mother about Nathan's registry, pressed and held, and tapped to remove. The notification disappeared. The canyon road stretched out ahead of me, red walls on both sides going gold in the morning light, and I drove south with all 4 windows down and the kind of quiet in my chest that doesn't mean emptiness. It means room. There's something I've been thinking about since I drove out of Sedona that Sunday morning with the windows down and the canyon walls going gold on both sides of the road. Nobody handed me that weekend. I built it, not in a motivational poster way. I mean literally, piece by piece, over years of quiet decisions that nobody saw and nobody rewarded. The business courses I taught myself at night while I was hostessing at a country club that would later not invite me to my brother's rehearsal dinner. The startup I moved to Austin for, alone, with no safety net, while my father's voice in my head called it an emotional decision. The 14 months I ground through when that startup failed, taking freelance contracts, eating cheap, telling nobody. Every one of those things felt like a loss while it was happening. Looking back, they were practice. What I understand now is that character, the kind that actually holds up under pressure, doesn't come from being supported. It comes from deciding what you stand for when the people who were supposed to support you are busy standing for something else. I had to figure out what I believed about myself entirely on my own, which is a hard way to learn, but the only way the lesson actually sticks. Simone drove to Austin when the startup failed and sat on my floor. She didn't ask what I needed. She just showed up. That's the kind of intelligence I've learned to trust more than any professional credential. The ability to read a moment and put yourself in it without being asked. She couldn't have known then what I was going to build. She just knew I was a person worth sitting with. That judgment, that quality of attention, that matters. I've tried to bring it into how I treat the people around me because I know what it felt like to receive it when I had nothing else. And Patrice, standing at that dinner table in Sedona with her glass raised, talking about people who find their own table. She wasn't being poetic. She was naming something real. At some point, staying at a table where you are consistently undersized is not loyalty. It is self-abandonment dressed up as patience. Knowing the difference and having the nerve to act on it is one of the harder things a person can do. It took me years. It cost me some grief I'm still working through. But I did it, and I didn't burn anything down on my way out. I filed paperwork. I answered one phone call with my full name on the line. I drove south on a canyon road on a Sunday morning and felt something in my chest that I finally recognized as space. The calls, all 51 of them, were never about me. That's the part that took me the longest to understand. They were about a story my family had told themselves, in which I was a background character, useful when needed, invisible otherwise. When the Instagram post appeared and the story didn't match anymore, the call started. Not to apologize, to renegotiate the terms of my invisibility. I didn't pick up. The quiet that came after wasn't emptiness. It was the sound of a door I'd been propping open finally, gently closing on its own.